Welcome to Rise Above, Real People, Real Talk. And I'm so excited to have our very first segment with Miss Lisa, who has an incredible story of overcoming some amazing, heart-wrenching things and just coming out so beautiful in spite of it. So I'm not going to take much time, but Lisa, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, just to give us an idea of who you are and where you come from.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I'm Lisa Drennon. I am a mom of 3 adult children. I've been married for 27 years and I work full time and have a side gig as an ULA certified life coach. And I'm also a certified aroma freedom practitioner. And I also do the Young Living little gig thing too. So I basically combined those 3 things together to come up with this amazing coaching program that works on I help women with repressed emotions. So just releasing repressed emotions that they didn't even know existed and that were causing physical, emotional pain and preventing them from moving forward. Kind of like fear blockers. We go through a series of steps to release those fears so they can move forward.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I definitely resonate with the ULA life coach, which I'll be doing eventually. I am also the AFT practitioner and Young Living, and especially the emotional, the repressed emotions. I think the key to my own healing was being able to go back and start that process of unraveling, realizing what was true and what wasn't true, and some of the things I could let go of, and some of those things that were just holding me back that I had no idea of. And now, once I was in a safe place in my own marriage that was healthy, I was able to start healing. So, you said you've been married 27 years, and I think we'll kind of start here and then go backwards in your timeline with
Okay.
your story. Um, so, how did that help you to start healing or growing in your marriage of 27 years? Obviously, there was some bit of stability there.
Yes. Well, if I could describe myself, in one word, it would be loyal. So my husband and I are very loyal. I met him when I was 21, and he's 10 and a half years older than me. And I've always liked older guys. I actually asked him out, and I was a single mom when I met him. My oldest is 34, and he was 3 when I met my husband, and we just clicked. There was something about him. Ironically, I have to share this story. Italian, Roman Catholic, shamed my family getting pregnant at 17. I was engaged to my son's father, who repeatedly cheated on me. And after going through, I come from a divorced family, and after seeing what my mom struggled with and what my brothers, I'm the only girl, youngest, I have 3 older brothers, what we all struggled with from that divorce, I knew I wanted stability for my son, and I didn't want to put him through the emotional train wreck that I was on. So my mom's whole thing was, well, you should have married his father and ended up on welfare and divorced. And I was like, I'm not reliving your life, no way. So when his father cheated on me for the umpteenth time, it hit me. I was like, I'm not doing this. So I broke off the engagement. We had a wedding date set, and I said, yep, gone, you're gone, goodbye. And I didn't date for a whole entire year. And when I met my husband, that whole time I was single, I was having this dream that my husband's name started with a D and ended with an A. And I thought, that's a weird name. And I'm racking my brains out, asking my friends, what guy's name starts with a D and ends with an A? Couldn't figure it out. Meet my husband. I asked him out, and we started dating. 3 weeks into it, we were talking, and we were like on this truth serum. And he goes, well, I have to tell you something about myself. And I'm like, uh-oh, here it is. He's like, well, my name really isn't, his name's Kip. He goes, my name's really not Kip. I go, what is it? He goes, it's Dana. My first name is Dana. My middle name is Kip. And I'm like, your first name is what? And I'm like, Dana, Dana. So I told him my dream, and we were only 3 weeks dating. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna scare this guy right away, right off. So we ended up married, and we've been together, and it's been a struggle because of my emotional imbalance. I pushed him away a lot. I literally, if you could see a 6-inch brick wall all around, I was in the center of it. And I would not let him in. I would not share anything with him. He didn't know about any of my history as far as like divorce until well into our marriage. Like I could not share that. And so I was just this emotional mess, and I started counseling because he would say something that would trigger me and I would just flip out on him. And if we were out with friends and he looked at another woman, I would be like all over him, so super jealous and giving him a hard time. And he's like, what is wrong? And I didn't know. I didn't know that the jealousy was from the prior relationship, and I wasn't comparing them at all. It's just that every time I saw something, I was so on guard. I'm like, oh no, that's not going to happen again. So I started counseling, and I mean, from 18, every single year, I met with different counselors. I did groups. I read books about anger. I did boundary training, and I could never really heal. I just couldn't figure out. And then I went through I statement training and practiced I statements. But I was so used to burying my feelings and being so afraid to tell people how I felt, because I was always like, well, I don't care how you feel. Your feelings don't matter. So I got to the point where like I would like literally just stuff and then explode. And it was affecting my kids. And, after we got married, we had 2 children together. So I have a daughter and a son. So a son, daughter, son. And, they're 34, 26, and 22. And I always tell my oldest, well, thank you for, you don't come with an instruction book, but you taught me a lot about sharing my thoughts and my feelings. And like my oldest, he was yelled and screamed at the same way I was when I was growing up. And, the relationship now is kind of strained because he only talks to me when he's like really upset. And the other 2 are super close and will talk to me all the time. But I learned from my oldest that no, you can't scream and yell. You have to communicate like, okay, when you do something, I feel this way. And, you can't be that nagging mom and that nagging wife who consistently demands, oh, you do this now or else. And you really have to see the joy. One of my biggest turnarounds in all of my years of counseling was Ann Camp wrote a book called 1,000 Gifts. And you practice writing 10 things that you're thankful for every day. When I started thinking about all the things I was thankful for, I stopped. I was like, wow, this is awesome. So I literally would wake up to a sink full of dishes every day and be like, why can't they wash their own dishes? And I'd be like all ticked off. I'd literally come home from work. I always worked full time. I'd come home from work with these teenagers going crazy, not doing their homework, wanting to be driven here and there everywhere. And these dishes and I'd be like all upset. My husband would be like, make them do the dishes, make them do the dishes. And there'd be like this big emotional roller coaster around this sink full of dishes. And I'm like, stop, just stop. Who cares about the stupid dishes? I'll just do them. And mind you, the dishwasher was right next to the sink. But anyways, I learned the 10,000 gifts, and I started being thankful. I'm so thankful that I have a sink full of dishes. It means I have a family to take care of, and I'm so thankful that we have enough food to eat. And that totally, and I started posting it on my Facebook page, and it totally changed my whole outlook in life as to be thankful for things. So that was the journey with that. And then when I learned boundaries and realized, I had a teenager and then I had a tween. And so I tell my husband, we never got out of the teenage years. Most people go through them like quick. We were in them for like 20 years and it was very trying. So by the time my youngest became a teenager, it was like exhausting. I was just like, okay, just, what do you want to do? Yeah, just go. Just go do what you want to do. But they all ended up turning out really well. And I tell them, if you ever go into therapy, I gave you lots of material. You're good to go.
There's so much in there. And I think every parent can really relate to that, but especially touching on the importance of doing that inner emotional work. You were able to identify it. You didn't have maybe the most ideal upbringing. You didn't have the most ideal childhood, which carried over into your adulthood. So then having to be a single mom and then come into all these new things without really a guide, I mean, that's overwhelming. So then you're like piecing your life together and you look at everyone else around you and it's like, well, this is where I should be, but I'm not. And then, you know, that's something that I have gone through. And I think it's more common than people let out, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
why don't we go back a little bit to some of the things you did have to overcome and maybe some of the harder places in your life to kind of those stepping stones that got you to where you are now.
Okay. Well, there are so many different paths and influencers. Um, so I would say the biggest thing is, raising teenagers, you experiment, kids experiment with drugs and all of that. And when my kids started getting into experimenting with alcohol and marijuana, it really became a concern for me because I was addicted to, partying. As a teenager, so when I was growing up, I was exposed to, my parents were divorced, and I was exposed to all kinds of drinking and drugs and everything. My older brother was responsible for taking care of me, and him being my babysitter, if he was 14, 15 years old at the time, I was like 4 or 5 years old, he wasn't going to let that stop him from having parties. So there was tons of like drinking and drugs and things like that, and there was all kinds of like sexual things going on, and I was sexually molested repeatedly. I don't even know how old I was when it started, maybe 2 or 3. And I just thought that was normal. I just, I didn't know that that wasn't. So I basically did not have a childhood. And, when I was growing up, my parents were divorced. So my dad would come and pick us kids up for the visitation. And he would make us wait like 2 or 3 hours past the time he was supposed to be there. And then when he picked us up, we always did the same thing. We always went to the mall and got a hot fudge sundae, which was a really good memory for me because I love hot fudge. But as soon as I got home, my mom would literally sit me in the chair. Why my brothers didn't have to go through this is beyond me, but I would literally get stuck in the chair and badgered for like an hour, with bombarded with, what'd your father say? What did you do? Where'd you go? What, and just on and on, to the point where I would get so angry and I would blow up at her. And then we would get into a big, huge fight, and, she would let her anger out on me. And this was like the vicious cycle. So I ended up hating my dad because it was awful coming home and I didn't have a good relationship with him. And then I turned to, my self-esteem was so low, and like my dad would pick me up and he'd be like, oh, you're so stupid. So like I grew up thinking I was stupid, ugly, too skinny, not respected, because we were very poor growing up, being coming from a broken home. My mom was always complaining about money and stuff. So just that stigma of growing up like that, I ended up turning to like drugs, like, hey, let's just be high all the time. So taking LSD, mushrooms, drinking, and I'm talking like at 9, 10 years old. I'm not talking like at 12, 13, 14. And ironically, we had moved from the city to Greece, which is like a small suburb in the city of Rochester. And, so if you think, small town city, basically, but you think a bar at the corner, a busy street, a stadium down the street, to cornfields. And I'm like, the reason why my mom moved is because my oldest brother got stabbed at the local high school, and she didn't want us to have to go through that. So we picked up and moved out to this rural area with corn mazes. And one of the other things she said is, I don't want them exposed to drugs. Okay, well, too late. Whether or not she knew we were playing, me and my brother were doing drugs or not, I don't know. But ironically, we moved to this area, and the first thing I was introduced to was homegrown marijuana. Okay, so much for getting us out of that situation. It's apparently everywhere. And I could never really get into smoking marijuana because I have bronchial asthma, so I didn't like it. And the kids used to tease me so bad because I would cough so hard, and it would instantly get me to the point where I was so buzzed, I was like, no. And I went through this series of drinking, just drinking, and we tried, different like speed and LSD and all of that. And I actually, I got attention. I was fun, or so I thought I was. And, everything was numb. I didn't have to worry about the poverty at home, the yelling and the screaming, getting in trouble for every little thing. And despite all of that, I was a really good student. I had really good grades, and I loved to write. Um, and I used to take all of my anger and frustration out on with the pen and paper. And I was just to write and write all of the angry things, because like literally, if my mom would embarrass me so bad, if I came home with friends, she would yell and scream at all of us. And like I'm friends with one of the girls still, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I remember when your mom used to yell and scream, the whole neighborhood could hear her." And I'm like, and it was very embarrassing. But all my friends were getting boyfriends at 15, 16 years old, and I wanted to have a boyfriend, and no one would even look at me. People would tell me that I was ugly. And I was like, okay, well, why am I so ugly? So one night when I met my oldest's biological father, he was paying attention to me. So we were on I was on drugs. Me and my friend were there. We were tripping on LSD. We were drinking like no tomorrow. And it was like almost in a dream almost. And I connected with him, and I was stuck with him for like 3 years. And I say stuck because he was a narcissist and a gaslighter. And I didn't even I wanted that attention so bad. And he was 3 years older than me. He was working full time. He was in the military. So, tall, dark hair, blue eyes. And my friend told me, she says, "You got to stay away from him. He's bad news." And I'm like, "Oh, you're just jealous, whatever." But literally, I got myself wrapped up into this distorted relationship where I was basically controlled and manipulated every day of my life for 3 years. I ended up losing my virginity to him, getting pregnant, and immediately was, "Oh, you have to have an abortion." And now I was just like, okay. I mean, literally, he would tell me to jump, and I would ask him how high. I would literally wake up and just totally cater to this guy, give him so coming from an Italian family, the woman always served their men. You cooked and you baked and whatever you did. So coming from that mentality, like literally this guy did everything. And my mom was questioning, like, okay, I would lie to her and say, "Oh, I'm sleeping at my friend's house," and I'd go sleep over at his house. And of course she couldn't stop me because I would just run away, be like, "Screw you, I'm just going to go do what I want to do." So the first abortion, I was drugged up, I was on Valium, and I smoked something before I went in. And I remember walking in and seeing all the protesters. And I remember this one guy holding the sign just saying, "Don't go, we can help you." And I was like, nope, because my boyfriend was over here saying, "Let's go, 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 go." So we got swiftly pulled in. I remember the doctor and the nurses and the sound of the suction and out like that. And I woke up and I was in his house, in my boyfriend's house, and he brings me this, he goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not okay." He goes, "Well, it's nothing. It was just a blob. It wasn't a baby." And I was just like, whatever. So I remember he served me this gross burger with ketchup just pouring all over it. And to this day, I hate ketchup. And I'm like, and I did a roll of freedom and realized why I don't like ketchup. But yeah, so I was brainwashed not to be on birth control because that's against God, and coming from a Catholic background, you don't take birth control. So did you think I was going to stop having sex? I mean, I'm 15, 16 years old. I have this guy who's got me totally wrapped around his finger. So no, I got in trouble again and had another abortion. And the second time, I just totally was so numb to the pain and so hurt that I couldn't even believe I was in this position again. And I remember there was this poem that my mom was very religious and was pro-life, and she'd get all these little prayer cards in the mail and all these free like mass cards and stuff. But I'll never forget, there was this gold card, and there was a picture of a tree, and it was called the abortion tree. It was a poem, and it was just about being sorry for hanging you on the abortion tree. And I remember reading it and just crying my heart out and thinking, what have I done? And I was like, So ironically, I'm a Jesus follower right now. I love Jesus. He is my Lord and Savior. And I always thought I was following him back then, even though I was making all these horrible choices. Being a Catholic, you don't really say you're saved. You don't accept Jesus into your heart. You just know he's part of the Holy Trinity. So here I am, desperately crying out, reading this card, and praying that the Lord forgives me, and praying for these two little babies that I thought were blobs for forgiveness. And I took that card, and you're talking like in the 80s, there was an Ann Landers column in the newspaper, and I wrote to her and I just said, put this in there. And I put it out in the mailbox while my mom found it. Never said a word. She took it out of the mailbox. And, I looked in the paper every day to see if it was going to get published, and it never did. And I thought, well, whatever. And broke up with my boyfriend and said, you're toxic. I can't deal with you. Like, you are not helping me, and I'm just a hot mess. And I really didn't know what to do. And I got a job, and I started like just diving into my studies, graduated a year early. And I said, if I will never, ever have an abortion again. And I kind of got like off the drugs, and started just doing things like that I like to do, like reading and stuff like that, and bicycling and stuff. So he wouldn't leave me alone. He just kept harassing me, and he'd show up at my house. He'd show up if I go to a basketball game, he was there. He would try to come pick me up after school, and he would just like relentless. Well, meantime, we were broken up. He slept with my best friend, and kind of rubbed that in my face. And I was just like, okay, first of all, we were best friends. How did you do that? Second of all, you're done. You're out of my life. And third of all, you can have him because he's a loser. Okay, so knowing all of this, don't I get back together with him? And I'm thinking, looking back at that person, I'm like, what was wrong with you? So we got back together, and lo and behold, I got pregnant again. And this time I said, you know what? I'm having the baby. I'm 17 years old. I'm done with high school. I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to raise the baby. And at that point, I told my parents, and my mom never told me that she knew about the abortions, but she says, well, we'll help you. And she actually wanted to adopt my son, her and my stepdad. And I said, no, that's weird. No, you're not adopting him. But she was very close with them and helped raise him. But that was a toxic relationship as well, because she also was controlling and had narcissistic tendencies, and just tried to control me to the point where, like, if I tried to discipline my son, she would intervene. And, I would come home, like, her whole thing was, you need to find a husband, you need to find a husband. I'm 18 years old, okay? Not, you need to, get on your feet or what have you. It had me scared to death to live in an apartment by myself, because I might get raped and somebody might steal my baby. So totally brainwashed into thinking I wasn't able to do anything on my own. I stayed with her for the first 3 years, and every boyfriend I came home with, it was like a nightmare. It was like they got sat down, got 20 questions, they were assessed, and then they made a decision as to whether or not I could stay with him to marry him. And I'm like, what? And I was just like, so I started counseling at this point. I was just like, something's not right, but I didn't know how to get out of it. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know like what else I could do. And the counselor would just listen to me talk, which, as you can see, I can do for hours. And eventually I met my husband, and he kind of just helped me. He says, well, and my mom couldn't stand him. She's like, no, he's from the South. He was so much older than me. And she felt that there was something wrong with him because he had never been married. And I said, there's nothing wrong with him because he's never been married. And I said, it's just, he was working on the road and this and that. So we got into a big, huge argument, and literally every single weekend she would fight with me in front of my son, to the point where my son wouldn't even talk to my husband. So he's 3 years old. So my mom tried to convince me that my husband was an abuser and that he was going to hurt us. And I was just like, okay, what's the truth? Like, what do I believe, and like, where do I go? But I felt comfort and safety with my husband, and I knew it wasn't true. But I just was torn, and I ended up breaking away from my mom, and I didn't talk to her for 7 years. And that whole 7 years, she called child abuse on me like 7 times, and I was investigated. And I told the investigators, and because they kept coming in, they're like, well, can we help you? Like, so my son was having emotional issues because of all the trauma from being torn from his grandmother and all the fighting and screaming and hollering and yelling. And I didn't really know how to deal with him. So like if he did something, I would scream and yell at him. And I see, like, he has a dog now, and I see him like yell at his dog. I'm like, oh no, you got to stop. You need to, let's work on this. Go to counseling. Told him about the aroma freedom. He hasn't jumped on the bandwagon yet. But I'm like, no, I understand. It's innate. We need to change. We need to break this cycle, because I've learned that it's hereditary, and like you pick up this negative DNA. And my mom passed away 2 years ago. And on her deathbed, she was saying how mean her mom was to her. And she used to get physically abused. And my mom hit us, but not, we probably deserved it because we were such bratty teenagers. But she was abused like bad, like hot water poured on her, and starved, and locked in her bedroom. And my older brother was telling me she used to do that to him. And my 3 older brothers, they're 9 and 7 years older, and then my one brother's a year older, so there's a big gap between us. So my older brother and I were talking. He's like, oh yeah, she used to lock us in the room, and we couldn't do anything for hours. And I'm like, okay. He goes, you had it made. You weren't as abused as I was. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, but I was sexually abused. And when I told my mom, she told me I was a liar. So then I thought, she's like, well, you saw that on TV. It didn't really happen to you. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, well, did it happen to me? I know, yes, it happened to me. And I brought up those repressed memories and learned that, like, I don't like to hug. I come from an Italian family. I don't like to hug. Don't touch me. If I feel a vibe from somebody, if they try to give me a hug, like especially one of my friends' husbands, I'll be like, oh no. And I'll tell my husband right away. They made me totally uncomfortable. And he goes, well, why? I go, I don't know. And I think just the way like their touch was, it may have stirred up a memory. And yeah, so it's something that I'm definitely going to be unraveling. And I've gotten, the brick wall is broken down a lot further, and I'm more open, as you can see, with my story. I just started sharing the fact that, I was sexually molested for several years through my childhood, and, having the abortions, and healing. Sharing brings healing. And the more I shared, more layers the more the brick wall comes down. And I don't want to say it's completely down, because I know it's going to take a long time. But I know that my therapy is continuous. And, if I can look at my younger self and say, well, why did you allow somebody to control you? I think I was so desperate for attention. Mm-hmm. And I was so, I think my mom was so upset with the divorce and what had happened to her, and kind of filtered that on us, that she wasn't healthy, so I wasn't healthy. And I know it was kind of like a domino effect with my kids, and like I try to talk to them and say, hey, listen, we're going to change this. We're going to break this chain, and we're going to be healthy emotionally, so that you don't have your kids go through the same thing. So,
breaking generational curses.
Yeah. And it's funny because years ago I was introduced to a book. Part of my journey was to look into the spiritual warfare, because I figured from 18 until 32, all the counseling I had was really me paying somebody for me to talk. And they didn't really give me any advice. And it was really frustrating to me, because I thought, I'm not going anywhere. And then I did this thing called Matt Talbot Ministries, which is very similar to AA meetings. And I started healing a little bit, and I was able to be strong enough to say, no, I don't like what you're doing. This is how I want to be. In 2013, when I started 1,000 Gifts, I met with this, what they call a Stephen Ministers counselor, and I learned about one word. I was so busy trying to focus on all of my hurts at once, I couldn't focus on what I needed to focus on. With the one word, I was able to focus on the one thing. And my heart and mind were so out of sync. I just had these chaotic thoughts. And if I had to clean the house, it would trigger me into an anger spasm that was like, my kids would be like, what is your problem? And they'd be like, uh-oh, mom's cleaning the house again. And then what happened was, when I was growing up, I couldn't go anywhere until my house was spotless. okay, well, when you're a teenager and your friends are outside waiting for you and you didn't make your bed in the morning, you were forced to make your bed, so, you know, it just made me nervous. And we had all this stuff and I hated stuff. So it just triggered all of these negative memories of, and I would just scream out. And my kids were like, what makes you so nervous about cleaning the house? I'm like, I have no idea. So when I started the one word, I'm like, I want peace. So I started focusing on how do I get peace? Well, I never took me time. So being a young mom, 18, getting married, having more children, working full time, running around, you know, as my daughter was born, my son started getting into sports. I had no time. I didn't even know me time existed. So when I learned the one word, it's like, how do you get peace? Well, you spend 30 minutes a day with yourself. So I would schedule, literally, I would have a timer on my clock. I would get an appointment calendar, like a journal, and I would say, I would get up 30 minutes before everybody else, and I was like, okay. And I would meditate, I would talk to God, I would journal, and I would just take that 30 minutes. And when I started doing that, then I was like, oh, wow, I am so much more happier and I'm able to pour into others more. And that really changed my attitude because I wasn't like doing stuff because I thought I had to. I was doing stuff because I really wanted to. You know, whereas before I was like, I literally would have a 7-course meal every day prepared for my family. So I'd work 7 to 3:30, come home, cook dinner, get the kids off to their sports, get them all bed, get their homework done, and go to bed and like be in bed by 9 o'clock. Totally exhausted, thinking, you know, I was overweight. I was eating all kinds of bad foods just because I was like trying to eat away the pain and the depression and the anxiety that I was feeling because I wasn't taking care of me.
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't even go get my nails done. I didn't go for a massage, which is these things I do now because there was no time. And I was just like, okay, well, I need to do something. So I started volunteering, but everything I did volunteering was around my kids. So I
Mhm.
became a scout leader because my kids weren't scouts, you know, and it was good. It was okay. I got to relate to other parents, but it still didn't fulfill me. It just was something that I did because I wasn't going to sit there. I had to do something anyways. But I think through that, I learned what my likes and dislikes were. So it wasn't all, you know, we try to take our trials and turn them into treasures. So volunteering and helping and like I became a scout leader. I'm still a merit badge counselor. So I still like, you know, help the boys get through that process and learn and teach them skills. And I enjoy that. And I've been doing that even though I've been out of scouting for, I don't know, 10 years now. I'm still in scouting.
That's wonderful. I think that you have come so far, and then you didn't have a whole lot of support or people just telling you this is how you start healing. You've had a journey very similar to mine where it's just kind of come along and you started realizing those things. And the the fact that you are now able to start taking care of yourself for once, for the first time in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the hugest thing right there. I think I see so many stay-at-home moms, single moms, and guys too, that are just so depleted and drained. And there's this thing of busyness, and we just keep filling that stuff rather than just taking that time to empty ourselves and take care of who we actually are, connect with ourselves. So there's so much in there, and I'd love to just chat with you so long about this, but I know we need to wrap up a little bit. So I would say, if you could share what happened that really pushed you to that point where you started saying, like, when you broke up with your first son's father for good, what made you not go back to the narcissist? What made you not go back to that toxic relationship and then not go into another toxic relationship and start taking care of yourself?
Mm-hmm. He so the first time I broke up with him, my friends started coming out of the woodworks telling me all the times that he had cheated on me.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, what? And I would sit and realize that like weekends upon weekends, I would be at his house and he'd be like, you know, I wasn't old enough to drink and he was out old enough to go to bars. And he'd be like, oh, me and my buddy are going out to a bar. And, he'd be home like 5 hours later, and I'd be stuck at his house Friday night, and I had no transportation. And he would come home and he would have lipstick, like, on his shirt or whatever. Oh, no, that way. And he would lie about it. And I would believe him. But after we broke up and I had heard all the stories, I said, well, why didn't you guys tell me? They're like, well, I don't think it was our place. And, I was just like, okay, fine. And when I was going to get married to him, we had our wedding date set. We had the rings and everything, and the church, everything was planned. I was pregnant. I was 8.5 months pregnant. So my son's birthday is May 11th. We were going to get married June 21st. It was like the beginning of May, and he had japped on me. He was constantly leaving me places. Like my dad used to not, like if I had to get a ride from work, he wouldn't show up till 3 hours later. And I'd be like standing at work waiting. And it brought back a lot of memories about my dad, and I didn't like it. And I was at this park and was with my friends. He had japped on me, and I saw him there with a girl. And I was just like, I walked right up to him. If you can imagine, I was 90 pounds when I was pregnant. I'm 5 feet tall. I'm huge, okay? I ate whatever I wanted to when I was pregnant. And I had this huge belly. I ran over to him. And he's sitting there with the girl, and I just looked at him. I said, oh, how are you going to get out of this one now? And I took his ring, and I threw it at him. And that was it. And I just peeled out of there, and I says, I'm done. I'm not doing this. And all I could picture myself was being married to this guy who was never going to come home on time. I would have this nice dinner on the table, and it would go cold, and I'd be eating by myself, taking care of the kids by myself, always wondering. And that was kind of my pivot point. I was just like, no, I'm done. Sorry. And when my parents were mad. They were so angry at me. I said, I don't care. I am not. I told my mom, I screamed at my mother, I am not living your life. I'm not. I don't care. If I'm going to be poor, I'm going to be poor in my own way, not with this asshole who's treating me horribly. And then I wrote down a list. Again, I mean, I was raised in the Catholic faith, so I knew God was there, but I was taught to fear God.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote down, I was talking to God, I was angry, and I did what I call a brain dump. And I said to the Lord, I said, if you are my God and you care so much about me and my path, then what am I supposed to do? Because I have no clue, and I don't want to live this craziness. I don't want my son to be raised in this craziness. And I just got this strength within me that just said, you'll be okay. And I broke up with, so obviously we broke up, and he tried coming back, and I said, take a hike, you had your chances. And then my son got baptized. He shows up at the baptismal, and my mom's like, well, let him stay, he's the father. And I'm like, what? And I didn't want to cause a scene in the church, so I allowed him to stay. And when, I'll never forget it, the priest, like, well, what do you want to, they asked you the question about getting your baby baptized. And I had given my son my last name, and the priest read his last name as his father's last name, and I interrupted him. I said, no, I'm sorry, the baby's last name. This is the baby's name. And everyone looked at me, and I don't know where that came from, but I just knew right then and there, like, I don't care if you're here today. I don't care if you're in the pictures. You're done. I'm so done with you. You are not going to do this to me. I'm not going to do this. And I sat him down. We got home. We had the baptismal celebration. Everyone left. I sat him down, and I said, are you willing to be a faithful father? Are you willing to be a faithful husband? Are you willing to be home at this hour and do these things? And are you willing to go to counseling? And he said, no. I said, goodbye, leave. I don't ever want to see you again. And I didn't want anything from him. I didn't want child support. And that was it. It was done. And I think the biggest thing for me was just reflecting on who I was as a person and knowing that I was strong enough to make it on my own. And that so I had started counseling at that point, and I remember the counselor had said, well, what are you afraid of? And I said, well, what do you mean? I'm not afraid of anything. You know, I'm a big, tough girl. I mean, I could take care of myself. She says, well, no. She was, inside you have this fear. Is it the fear of being alone? Is it the fear of being used? Is it the fear of being abused? She says, like, if you look back at your history, what are you afraid of? I says, well, I'm not afraid of being alone. I go, and I'm afraid of being abused. I said, I do not want to. I've been through so much emotional abuse. I don't want to be continuously emotionally abused. I want to get away from that. And then she says, well, okay, she says, you need to move out of your mother's household because she is emotionally abusing you. And I was just like, what? What? And I tried to move away. It's harder to move away from your mom than it is a boyfriend.
That's for sure.
And so I tried to, but I think the biggest thing looking back at my 18-year-old self was, no, I'm not going to be abused. I'm not going to be controlled, and I will figure it out. And I slowly figured it out. The fear factor was being alone and not being able to make ends meet. But you know what? God provided financially, and there was things I could have done without. Like when I got my own apartment, I didn't know that I could get help. I can get public assistance and still work full time. Like nobody tells you that there's these benefits out there. So my one friend was going into social work, and she's like, I remember she came to my job, and we were going to lunch, and she's like, Lisa, do you know that there's daycare provisions, like a benefit for daycare out there? And do you know you can get health insurance if your employer doesn't offer you? And I'm like, no, I had no clue. So she taught me and introduced, and she says, and you have these wonderful skills. You can go into office work. She was, I was working at a grocery store. She says, get out of the grocery store business and go into your field. So by her encouraging me, and she was the same age. I mean, we have a similar story, but by her just saying those 3 words of encouragement, I quit my job. I got a job as a secretary in an office, and I just kept taking classes and reading books about boundaries and I statements. And I just started working on, I literally had like affirmation statements, and like I have so many journals. I feel angry when you tell me what to do. I feel stupid when you tell me that I can't budget my finances. And at that point, I was turning to retail therapy, and I was really bad with finances. So I was using, instead of using the alcohol, I was using the credit cards. And then I kind of got into that mix. And so, yeah, it's been this, I went from one crutch to another. So, yeah. Like I said, I think our weaknesses come up when we're hurt, and it's so important to deal with the hurt, to figure out where that fear is coming from. Because if you can walk through the fear, in ULA we have a thing said, ready, set, go.
Yeah.
If you think about that fear, what's going to happen when you get to the other side? What's going to happen if you choose not to? And since I've learned that, every time I think about the fear and I walk through it, I'm so much better than if I stayed behind it and chose not to propel myself. So do it scared. Do it completely scared, because there's only 2 fears we're born with: the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises, and everything else is learned behavior. And if you think about all the fears that we have, the average person has 7 fears. How many fears do you have? I had a list of 25. I'm down to 3. You know.
I was agoraphobic. It was that bad that I was afraid of almost everything. I just locked myself inside. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fear can be very powerful, and overcoming fear is huge. And what's important is the lies that we believe are so based on our fears and our emotional mindset. So the piece of taking care of yourself and having me time and just realizing, you know, I do brain dumps like probably twice a week now. And I know there's different terms for that. For my brain dump, you write down everything, 15-minute timer, you write down everything, you set it aside. The next day you look at it and you circle like words and you categorize them. And then from there, you can work on your one word, your one thing. You know, you have 3 goals a day. Today, this is what I want to do. And self-care is super important, because if you don't like this morning I woke up all stressed out. I started getting the tension headache knowing I was doing this. And I was like, okay, I need to do yoga. So I did my yoga, and I did my meditation. I did my aroma freedom session, and I was able to center myself. The tension in my head was still there, but it wasn't so overpowering and bearing. And our body, and I think you mentioned this earlier, our body talks to us about what's going on. So if you're waking up and something isn't right, you need extra time that day. You need to take care of yourself and just say, you know what, I'm doing this because I know if I don't, my whole day is going to be a whirlwind.
Right. So going into that, the ULA and the AFT have
Mm-hmm.
helped you to start taking more time for yourself to focus on that. So can you share what exciting stuff is coming up that you're doing to help you? You have helped yourself. You're still in that healing process, which
Mm-hmm.
I know I start with one thing and think I've got that, and then another thing pops open. So it's just like layers and layers and layers. But
Mm-hmm.
you have done so much, you've come so far, and I can see the light come out of you, and you're now using your voice and your story and your pain and all that stuff to share with others, which is so incredibly beautiful and powerful and so needed, especially during the state of things that we're in now. So
Absolutely.
can you share about some of the things coming up that you're doing?
Absolutely, I would love to. So Saturday, October 17th, we're doing, I'm with uh, Lynn Sullivan. She's also an ULA life coach. We're doing a workshop from 12 to 4, and it's amazing. It's a 4-hour workshop where we're going to go through all of the ULA. It's kind of a mini ULA Pazula. So if you know anything about ULA, ULA is it stands for ULA La, and it's a feeling you get every day you wake up just excited to be alive. And they base it on 7 key areas of your life. So fitness, I have to cheat here. Fitness, finance, family, field, faith, friends, and fun. And we work in each category setting goals, and then we have the one big goal. And it's really an incredible program because it's helped me focus on, by narrowing it down to what you need. Like for finances, for example, one of my crutches is when you have an addiction, it's hard to break. You need help. So addiction to sugar, to alcohol, drugs, credit card shopping, retail therapy, whatever it is, whatever you're addicted to, in ULA we can focus on that, and we can set goals. So if you have a financial goal, you have a green gap theory is what they refer to it as. You can actually overcome this debt and shift your mind and use different avenues to be able to meet what you need. You learn how to be balanced in these 7 key areas, and that's the workshop is going to be all about. So it's awesome. And if you can't make October's, we have one November 14th, and we also have one December 5th. And then I created an online class for transforming the narcissist in your life, how to transform the narcissist in your life. So it's a 5-module class. It's a forever lifetime access, and each class takes you through an aroma freedom session. We do a aroma reset. It's video, and then of course the aroma freedom. There's one online, one live one-to-one session, and then the rest is a recording. And it's an incredible. There's a workbook in there. There's affirmation statements, and I based it on this trust acronym that I came up with in my journey, because trust is a huge factor for me. My motto was trust no one, and that's where the brick walls come in. And when I meet somebody, I automatically, before I did not trust them, now I trust them. So that course is really cool, and it's amazing how it's helped change the mindset. And then of course there's the aroma freedom session. I like the one-to-ones. You can really do a lot of trauma work. The memory release is incredible for healing. And when you start unraveling those emotions, I know I was not propelling in my business because I was afraid of people telling me no. And when I started doing aroma freedom work, I realized that all the times people called me a liar, it made me not be able to share like the Young Living products because, people do, and I would just, all these negative thoughts would go through my head. And now I'm like, no, this is my story. If you want it, great. If it helps, awesome. But just to be able to be free from that bondage and those lies is incredible. And the aroma freedom just absolutely, as you know,
Mhm.
is a great release for that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for this. I mean, again, like there's just so much that we could cover. And, if there's anything else you'd like to come back on at a later time and share about, I'd love to have you because, again, there's so much that I identify with you. And we're at different stages in life, but there's so much in our healing journey where we're, parallel. And I think there's so much power when we've gone so long doing things alone, feeling alone, like you said, not learning to not trust people. And then we have to unlearn it to let the good people in, the ones
Mm-hmm.
who are authentic, even if there's some flaws there, but that are not toxic, and building those healthy relationships and then learning to just thrive in life and overcome all those things. So I just want to say I'm so grateful that we've been able to connect. And I know that your story is something that would have blessed me when I was going through my darkest times. So I hope that this can bless anyone else who is there or in some of those places, like you've mentioned, that you are at. And so grateful that you're not there anymore. But I also know there's still more to the healing journey, as is mine and anyone who goes through things. So just to wrap it up real quick, if you had one thing to say to that young girl who is about to walk into the abortion clinic and had that toxic boyfriend or a toxic parent just telling them what to do, what would you say to her? And what would you say to her after she went through it?
I would say to her, you're not alone. You can choose life. The life inside of you is a blessing, not a curse, and there's other options. There's help. Don't be fearful. Don't let finances or being alone be your deciding factor. And just know that God doesn't make mistakes, and there's a reason for why you're going through this. Right now, it seems like a trial, but it is going to be the most beautiful treasure. And if she decided to go through with it, when she came out of it, I would tell her it's okay, but you need to start the healing journey. And it's a process that you're going to be on for the rest of your life, because when you decide to go through that choice of aborting your baby, you realize that that is life, and that you've just chosen to take that life away. And you could have totally changed history because you have no idea what God's plans. Every single one of us is created by God for divine greatness and a purpose. And when we choose, our own pride makes us choose things that aren't the Lord's way. But when we decide to trust Him, we go down trust trail, beautiful things happen. So let's get you on your healing journey, and just know it's a commitment of a lifetime. Are you ready to be healed? Are you ready to begin the journey?
Oh, it's so good. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure to plug all your information in so everyone can have access to it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That concludes our very first segment of Rise Above, Real People, Real Talk with Lisa. We're so amazing to have you as our first guest. I don't think that was a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. So thank you so much again.